Right, hey folks. So today we're talking diet tips. Now, I want to bring you this video because I'm going to share with you 3 tips which are slightly counter mainstream. Now, for a lot of you guys, if you follow the mainstream diet advice, like typical bro bodybuilding advice, your chicken, rice, vegetables, a lot of you will follow that with all good intentions, or even just look at those foods and think, these are good foods, these are bodybuilding foods. But it won't work. It'll work in the sense of, carries in versus carries out, of course, but it won't work because you won't be able to stick to it. Those food options will just magnify your appetite so much that the diet will become impossible, unlivable. For some of you, the only way you'd survive a diet like that is if you just throttle through it with willpower. And that's not a good way to complete a diet. You shouldn't have to be super motivated to finish a diet. It should be a dietary adjustment which lets you eat less and feel better. And for a lot of you, if you stick to dietary mainstream advice, it will screw you. I've tried it. I don't diet in a very typical way, and I'm going to share with you today 3 things that I actually do which help me quite a lot. Because I think there's probably quite a lot of guys out there like me, who don't respond well to what is mainstream advice. I definitely follow, I would call, a mainstream training routine. I train with weights, I do my cardio, but my diet has to be completely different. If I dieted like a bodybuilding bro, it wouldn't work. My hunger would be out of control. So I have to do these things. And I think for some of you, this may be something which is applicable to you as well. So listen on. But before we get into that, I do coaching. Coaching is my #1 gig, is how I put food on the table. So if you would like some help in your physique goals, whether that's losing weight, gaining muscle, even contest prep. I prep bodybuilders, I prep powerlifters, then get in touch. There's a link in the description. Also, like and subscribe. And yes, support the YouTube channel. All right, so 3 things to help you guys. Let's get on with it. So firstly, let's talk about carbs versus fats. Now, I think the general gist of things when it comes to bodybuilding, maximize your carbs and then just have a small amount of fats for health. That seems to be the mainstream way of thinking things. It's the one which is most commonly associated with bodybuilding. But I think it's probably the one which is the least understood. So what I've done recently, which has helped me quite a lot with satiety, is rather than think about carbs and fats in terms of performance, and if you were thinking about purely performance, you probably would increase the carbs because carbs give you more energy, lets you train harder for longer. I can understand why that would be the advice given. However, if your problem isn't so much with performance, it's more with adherence, then we can switch things around a little bit. If you can train hard, but you are struggling massively with actually sticking to the diet, that's what this video is about. And I think for the large majority of guys, you're nowhere near as big as a pro bodybuilder, right? And also, maybe you're having trouble with sticking to a diet rather than with your performance in the gym. For that, you can actually switch that ratio around. You can lower the carbs dramatically and increase the healthy fats. Now, I just want to clarify, I'm not talking keto. To be honest, I don't really care too much about definitions of keto versus low carb or whatever. It's irrelevant because we're just talking about getting the best benefits from a certain setup. So the actual setup doesn't look that different. So let's say on a typical bodybuilder diet, you've got your chicken, lean beef, whey protein, eggs, yogurt. Carb sources, you've got lots of rice, pasta, potatoes, and then vegetables. Now, to switch that around, all you would do is you would quite simply take away a lot of the rice, the pastas, and the breads, and replace that with more energy-dense, fattier foods. So, for example, avocados, eggs, nuts, olive oil. Now, while it does appear that the size of the meals will be reduced, and they will be, okay, the actual volume of the foods will be lower. However, what I've found is that it's improved my ability to stick to a diet. So I get a lot less hungry. I'll give you an example of this. So recently I was dieting quite hard and I was on about really low calories, sort of 1,300, 1,400 calories a day, mostly from protein, very low carbs, and some healthy fats, right? Now, I decided to put back in some rice in my diet just for the purpose of increasing carbs to just increase energy throughout the week. Now, I ended up eating more calories. So I was eating 1,800 calories, but more carbs, same amount of protein, and less fat. Now, I got hungrier on more food. Now, we can argue why that happened, but it was so weird. It was so counterintuitive. I actually was hungrier eating more carbs and more total food with the same amount of protein. It's a tricky one. As I say, that's just one example. That's an N equals one. It could be explained by any number of things. But what I'm saying is this has helped me a lot in sticking to a diet as my needs change as I get older. I think it's very useful. So again, for you older guys who just think, dieting is too hard, it's for a young man's game, or for the younger guys who've never really had any degree of success, maybe you need to try this. Now, I do think there are some solid physiological reasons, and there is research behind this. I was reading on Lyle McDonald's website, Body Recomposition. He has an article which compares high carb versus high fat diets. And he shared a study which was looking at what the results found was that the majority of the women who were insulin resistant tended to do better with low carb, high fat approaches. And by better, what he meant was increased adherence, but actually also increased fat loss, which is weird when you think about it, because most studies we see don't tend to really find a lot of difference. But it seems to be that there is something there. There is some evidence, anecdotal and research, to suggest that some people will respond better to high carbs. The same people may respond really poorly to high fats, just due to how insulin sensitive they are, as well as the genetics. Which also may be one of the reasons why some pro bodybuilders tend to favor high carbs, because typically they're going to be very insulin sensitive with the amount of muscle they hold. So anyway, first point is carbs versus fats. I've had a lot of success with trading carbs for fats, and you guys might want to try. Now, the second thing, this is something which I've been doing for years and decades. I've found when my overall calories are a lot less, I find it easier to stick to a diet. So I can diet easier on 12 to 1400 calories than I can on 2000. I think there's this common misconception that the lower you go, the harder it's going to be to stick to a diet. I think that's the mainstream thought. The harder you dip into the diet, the greater the deficit, the harder it's going to be to stick to things. But actually, I found the complete opposite. And this is something I've found for years, decades even. I've found a robust calorie deficit is way better for adherence for me. But because you know the common trope, right? You know what every YouTube influencer says. They say, drop 500 calories and you'll lose a pound of fat and you'll be fine, right? That's what everyone says. It's the very safe, like Tim nice but dim approach to doing things. But when you're looking to get lean, and let's say you are a bit of an outlier, let's say you have got appetite problems, you can't stick to a diet. Okay, you've identified that's a problem. Now, let's look at some solutions. Obviously, discipline is a factor. No one's saying it isn't, right? But there are things you can change and things you can try out. I found consistently that when my overall calories are very low, I'm a lot happier. I'm fuller with the food I do have. I get less hunger. My energy is absolutely fine. So it's all good. So something that some of you guys could try is a much lower caloric intake. Now, the final thing goes alongside this all, and that is the topic of stomach capacity. This is something which I've loosely thought about for years, but I've never really thought about in any great level of detail, because I think the common sort of thought process is when you're dieting, eat more filling foods, right? That's what you guys have all heard. And I've probably said it in the past as well. You know, eat more filling foods, eat big salads, drink lots of water, eat potatoes to bulk out your meals. You guys have heard this, right? Bulk out your meals, fill out your stomach so you get the stretch reflex in the stomach and you feel full. Now, that is a thing, but there is a downside to that. We have to remember that the capacity of the stomach is very much dependent on what we are currently eating. So it expands and contracts relative to where we currently are. And I'll give you an example of this. I did a 6-month contest prep and I hit stage in 2018. Wonderful experience, by the way. Totally recommend it. And if you're interested in hitting stage, then contact me, because I am a prep coach. And I did a 6-month prep, and by the end of it, my stomach capacity was that of a little girl. It was awful. I specifically remember the week after my competition, I was tracking calories at this point. I was struggling to put down 2,400 calories. It was ridiculous. My stomach capacity was so drastically cut, because in those final couple of months leading up to the competition, I was eating hardly anything. So when it came to post-competition, there was no binge, because my stomach capacity was like this. I couldn't eat anything. Quite literally, 2,400 calories, I was struggling to put that down because my stomach capacity was so low. So when it comes to stomach capacity, something I want to just get you guys to think about is, if you are going to go with this approach where you're going to trade off some carbs for increased fats, and also you're going to drastically lower your calories, what you want to try and avoid is eating too much volume. I don't think it's that helpful, actually, because I think the combination of the dietary changes and the overall drop in calories, I personally think that's enough. If you start to load up with lots of vegetables, you might have a situation where you're full for one meal, full for maybe a day or two, but you're going to have to carry on having that high level of food volume. Now, that means when you finish the diet, you might have a terrible rebound because your stomach capacity will be massive. Ideally, we don't want that. We want to reduce stomach capacity. So I just want to say this as a counterpoint to people saying high volume eating. It's not everything. Trust me, I've tried it. A lot of people who do the high volume eating still struggle with their appetite, still struggle with binging. So they can't really say it worked for them. I think it can be cyclical. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think you have to cycle it. Cycle in periods of high volume eating, but don't have it as your baseline, because that means every single day you're going to have to eat kilos upon kilos upon kilos of food. Now, what if you go off plan for a day? What if you go out to the zoo, get some ice cream? Well, tough shit. You got the stomach capacity of an elephant. Now, you're going to try and fill that with ice cream. I don't think it's a great idea. I think stomach capacity is something you need to look at in terms of food options, but also in terms of fasting. I think fasting is great. Still do it. And I think training yourself to be able to fast teaches you to go without food, but it also reduces stomach capacity. Now, just want to say one last thing. I know stomach capacity is a bit of a controversial area. Look, I don't care about the science. I'm just telling you what I've experienced. Take it for what you will. So yeah, I'll call it there. Just to round up though, overall, 3 things that I felt have helped me, which have gone against the grain, kind of counterculture. One is dropping carbs, increasing healthy fats, keeping protein about the same. Second thing is drastically reducing overall caloric intake to the point where you go past hunger. Like I said, I get less hunger at 1400 calories than I do at 2000. The final thing is stomach capacity. High volume eating isn't everything. Utilize smaller, more dense meals as well as fasting to help you stick to your goals. Right, dude. Peace out. That was just a nice little quick message from me to you. I hope it helps. Peace, and I'll speak to you in the next one.